Just after the start of the new year, in 1996, two women are found brutally stabbed to death in their own homes in the city of Clarksville, Tennessee, just days apart. This came only a month after another woman had been found stabbed to death in her Clarksville home. That case would eventually get solved, while the other two are still waiting for answers. Outside of the local area, these cases have not received a ton of coverage, and because so little is really known, it's never been clear if they are connected. Today, I'll walk you through what is known and the theories that are out there, in the hopes that it jogs someone's memory and provides information that could help solve one or both of these cases. I'm your host, Megan, and each week on A Simpler Time True Crime, I cover older unsolved cases and challenge the idea that a simpler time meant a safer time. This week, I'm bringing to you the unsolved murders of Felicia Carson and Azuria Johnson. Thanks so much for tuning in to another week. I want to say up front that both of these cases are equally important to me. Azuria's case received much less coverage, and so I do my best in this episode to balance my conversation around the cases. But of course, I can only go by what information is available to me. Also, because I couldn't find any old news coverage of Azuria's case, I don't know with certainty that I'm pronouncing her name correctly, which is something I take very seriously. I went through and tried to find people who may have that same name and see how they pronounced it, but if you are her family or friend and you knew her, please feel free to reach out to me and let me know. And with that, let's get into it. It was just after 2 a.m. on Saturday, January 6th, 1996, and 21-year-old Sean Majors was out having drinks with a friend at the local American Legion in Clarksville on 9th Street, when he received a page from his live-in girlfriend, 20-year-old Azuria Johnson. For those too young to remember, pagers were essentially a one-way communication device. Most people couldn't respond from the pager itself. Instead, someone would send a phone number or a short message to the device, and the recipient would then need to find a telephone and call back. By the mid-90s, some pagers could display brief text messages, or what would be like text messages, but they were still a far cry from the instant back-and-forth communication we're used to today with cell phones. I'm not sure what type Sean Majors had, but what I do know is that he received communication from Azuria that her father was going to the hospital. Upon receiving this message, Sean said that he departed from the American Legion and began heading home to see whatever had to happen next. He had been driving Azuria's geo-tracker, and I'm sure he figured he needed to pick her up and get to the hospital with her. As he arrived back home to 824B Central Avenue, it was 2:48 a.m. When Sean came to the front door, he noted that the door was locked, but the deadbolt wasn't on. Because Azuria didn't open the door, he used a key to get in himself. And when he did so, he was startled by the sight. The apartment had been visibly ransacked, and that is when he saw something even more alarming: Azuria's feet. She was on her back on the kitchen floor with her hands tied behind her back with a telephone cord, and she was laying in a pool of blood. It was clear right away to Sean that there was nothing he could do for his girlfriend. An autopsy would reveal that Azuria had been stabbed 9 times in her heart and lungs. The nature of the stab wounds caused her to bleed out in under 5 minutes. I do want to note a couple of timelines here. According to reporting in the Leaf Chronicle, Azuria paged Sean around 2 a.m., and he placed the 911 call at 2:48 a.m. He says that he left the American Legion after getting the page. When I went onto Google Maps, the American Legion on 9th Street to the apartment would only be between 1 to 2 miles away and a few minutes drive, so that timeline doesn't precisely add up. But at the same time, we don't know how precise the timing was. If he didn't see the page right away, if it was the type of pager where you only got the notification that a number was paging you, maybe he had to go find a payphone to call from and have that conversation. That part we are a little in the dark about, and it makes a huge difference in the details. But in full transparency of the case, I wanted you to have that timeline. A large butcher knife was found with red stains on it near the sink. Police, of course, made the logical conclusion that the knife was the murder weapon, as it did match the stab wounds. It was out of the butcher block, and it had the red stains on it that appeared to be blood. However, they collected it and sent it off for further testing to confirm. By Monday, the 8th, police updated the media to say they were interviewing people but didn't have any solid leads or suspects. Azuria was buried at Woodlawn Elizabeth Baptist Church Cemetery, which is the church she was a member at. She had been born on October 4th, 1975, to Reginald Johnson and Portia Harris Johnson. She also had two sisters, Paula and Jewel. She graduated with the class of 1992 at Northwest High School and was working as a waitress at the Hickory Stick restaurant in Clarksville. She was just entering the start of her adult life when her future was taken from her in an act of senseless violence. In the mid-90s, Clarksville was a fast-growing city in northern Tennessee, sitting along the Cumberland River just south of the Kentucky border. It's located about 50 miles northwest of Nashville and is closely tied to nearby Fort Campbell, one of the largest military installations in the country. Because of that connection, Clarksville had a mix of longtime local families and military families who often moved in and out of the area. In the mid-90s, the city had a population of around 90,000 people, making it large enough to have busy commercial areas and growing subdivisions, but still small enough that violent crimes, especially stranger homicides, attracted significant attention. And I wanted to point out that population because Clarksville has pretty much doubled in size since that time, so it just has a totally different vibe now. Within the first few days, authorities were already trying to see if there was any connection between Azuria's case and another they were investigating that happened just a little over a month prior. On November 30th, 1995, 33-year-old Carolyn Tina Vega Velasquez was found by a mail carrier who grew suspicious of her mail piling up. And she too had suffered a violent death and had been dead for at least 72 hours before the mail carrier found her. Just like Azuria, she had been tied up, stabbed multiple times, and she had no signs of sexual assault. Police did not specifically mention her house being ransacked like the account Azuria's boyfriend had of their place. However, they did list robbery as a potential motive, which leads me to believe that the house was either visibly ransacked or they found specific items missing. It was shared that there were signs of a struggle. Carolyn lived alone. She had been born in June of 1962 in Elmore County, Alabama, to her mother Daisy. She also had a brother James and three sisters, Nasa, Pauline, and Sandy. Carolyn had served in the U.S. Army and was married to Staff Sergeant Mario Vega Velasquez. Tragically, he died in 1991 in a helicopter wreck in Saudi Arabia while taking part in Operation Desert Storm. After becoming a young widow in the 90s, she was in her 30s and she was in school pursuing her finance degree. Her college advisor described her as more of a leader than a follower. He said, quote, "She probably was one of the most involved in class. She was motivated to learn and was well liked by her classmates." He also said she was getting her finance degree so that she could be on top of her own finances, and that her financial independence was very important to her. I want to note that Carolyn lived in Adams, Tennessee, a bit north of Clarksville, and her house was on more of a rural stretch of road, whereas Azuria was in the heart of Clarksville. Her street was more of a residential neighborhood feel, and she lived in a ranch-style duplex in a community with little duplexes sprinkled around, not some massive complex. I'll have some pictures of the area in modern day over on the Instagram at simplertimecrimepod. The areas were about a half-hour's drive from one another. When studying the cases of Azuria Johnson and Carolyn Vega Velasquez, two police forces compared notes. Clarksville police were investigating the Azuria Johnson case, whereas the Montgomery County Sheriff's Department was investigating Carolyn's case. Both women had autopsies conducted by the same man, Dr. Charles Harlan, who was the assistant Montgomery County medical examiner and consulting forensic pathologist. He noted that both women had been stabbed in their homes and that the wounds were primarily toward the left side of the chest. Which, I'm not an expert here, but it does make you wonder if the person who did this either time was really focused on that, trying to lethally pierce the heart, knowing there wasn't a chance of survival if they did that. And if that was the case, unfortunately, they succeeded. Azuria Johnson had been stabbed with a butcher knife. The type of murder weapon couldn't precisely be determined in Carolyn's case, however, they believe scissors were used. Neither of the two women showed any signs of sexual assault. Still, during the autopsy, a rape kit was completed and sent off just to be thorough. Interestingly enough, it was reported that both women were attending the same college, Austin State P University in Clarksville, and both women were Black. Despite looking into the cases together, both departments downplayed any overlap and said it was just standard procedure to compare notes. But they wouldn't have the chance to stay focused on just these cases for long, because within days, another Clarksville woman would be found dead. It was Friday, January 12th, 1996, and a 7-year-old girl named Emily returned from school to her home at 134 Hadley Drive in Clarksville at 3:30 p.m. She was hoping to beat her older brother Gary home, so she had access to the TV first. According to the website Project Cold Case, Emily approached the front door and noticed what looked to be like blood on it. When she got into the house, the dark-colored carpet appeared to have mud all over. She called out to her mother, 33-year-old Felicia Carson, and said that she was home, but she got no response. Even as young as she was, she sensed that something was off. As she made her way down the hallway, her brother returned home as well. Emily then remembers walking into her mother's room and to her closet, where she remembers seeing blood all over the walls. Her mind just goes blank from there. The next thing she remembers is talking to police officers in her friend's kitchen. My heart absolutely breaks for Felicia's two children, knowing what they stumbled into. Felicia was dead in the closet, and the crime scene was so gruesome that Clarksville police who responded to the 911 call couldn't even tell if Felicia had been stabbed or shot. The autopsy, however, would reveal that she had in fact been stabbed, upwards of 80 times. Felicia was raising her two children alone in Clarksville. Her sister Cynthia told Project Cold Case that when Felicia would go to Gary's baseball games, she would cheer the loudest. She had beautiful dark hair with natural red highlights and a big smile. Her daughter Emily remembers her mother as tough but giving, who would do anything for a person in need. Felicia got married after high school to her husband, and they moved to Germany for a period of time. That's where they welcomed Gary. Then they moved back to the United States, and Felicia gave birth to Emily. The marriage didn't last, and Felicia's husband ended up moving to another state. So Felicia was taking care of everything on her own and making ends meet. She was incredibly smart and had recently gone back to college for her nursing degree, which she was well on her way to achieving. She loved plants and to garden, so for part-time work, while she was in college, she worked taking care of plants for local businesses. It was really important to her to be able to be home for her kids when they got on and off the bus each day. The family had no way of knowing that that Friday morning would be the last time she'd see her kids off to school. After her murder, they went to live with their father out of state, and everything as they knew it changed forever. The Clarksville State Police immediately called in the FBI on Felicia's case. Despite her being stabbed to death in her Clarksville home just days after Azuria Johnson and only a month after Carolyn Vega Velasquez, Clarksville Police Captain Doug Pechtel stated to the press that evidence found at the crime scene led his team to believe that the cases were not connected. And he said, quote, "I do not believe we have a serial killer connected in these killings," end quote. But that did not stop the general public from drawing comparisons. Initial reports indicated that Felicia was also doing school at APSU. However, the more journalists dug in, they found that despite earlier reports, Carolyn Vega Velasquez was actually the only one of the three women who was currently enrolled in attending classes on that main campus. Azuria Johnson had been taking classes at APSU but had taken a break the previous February. After a few phone calls, it was determined that Felicia was taking classes for nursing school at the Fort Campbell campus of Hopkinsville Community College in Kentucky. Early details of the investigation stayed quiet. The Leaf Chronicle interviewed neighbors about a week after Felicia's murder, and one woman said it spooked her, but she wasn't going to live in fear. She said she knew Felicia enough to wave hello to her, but because their street had a lot of apartments and also a transient military community, sometimes the neighbors didn't know each other super well. This neighbor said that she was now locking her doors and being a bit more cautious, but that she wasn't going to let this recent violence in her community drive her out. But she may have been speaking for just herself because an employee at a local business called Professional Alarms Inc. told the paper that sales had skyrocketed in a typically slow time of year for their business. And even though the campus connection seemed to fall apart, students on the APSU campus went on record to say they had been feeling fearful and that they were doing things like carrying pepper spray and taking self-defense courses. One thing that made Felicia's case stand out from the other two is that there were no signs of burglary or even an attempt to make it look like there was one. Instead, police described her murder as, quote, a jealousy, revenge, hatred killing, and not a burglary, end quote. By early February, police turned to the public for who that jealous or hate-fueled person may have been, as they were running into dead ends. They put up a $2,000 reward for information, leading to a conviction. By March of 1996, even though law enforcement in the area were convinced that the three cases were not connected, a special task force was formed to study these cases and others. And it's not likely what you're picturing. 14 non-law enforcement citizens were selected to review the case material from 11 unsolved murders in the area. But to be clear, they were not just random armchair detectives. They were hand-selected by the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office and Clarksville Police and included Fort Campbell Military Police, Austin Peay State University professors, 2 nurses, a psychologist, a sociologist, and a few other professions. In total, the task force was comprised of a mixture of 35 people that were civilians, other law enforcement from neighboring jurisdictions, and military. The plan was for Clarksville Police and the Montgomery County Sheriffs to present each case to the panel for 20 to 30 minutes and then allow questions. To protect the integrity of the investigation, confidentiality was required of participants of the panel, and their names were not released. Clarksville Police Captain Doug Pechtel told the press, quote, "There's nothing to prove that any of these murders is related to any other particular murder. And there is nothing to prove that any one of these murders is definitely not related to any one of the other murders," end quote. Another motivation for the task force was to supplement FBI behavior analysis profiles of the killer or killers in these cases. Doug Pechtel told the papers that the application for those at the time was 15 pages long and took about 6 months to get a profile developed, which, given the spike of these recent stabbings, he worried would be too long of a wait. The sessions for the task force began in April, and law enforcement reported back that the citizens had many good ideas and considerations, though, of course, that information could not be shared. By springtime, there were governor's rewards offered in all of the stabbing cases. In May, the public was updated that Azuria Johnson's murder had been extensively investigated, but that they were running into dead ends. The same went for Carolyn Vega Velasquez's murder. With public attention dying down, Felicia's brother, who lived in Georgia, took to the papers to try to raise awareness for his sister's case and other unsolved cases. It was published on July 12th in the Leaf Chronicle. I'll have it linked in the show notes, but I'm going to read it here. Be aware that this letter does contain more graphic details about Felicia's murder. Bill Denmark wrote, quote, I am writing in the hopes of informing and raising the public attention about my sister, Felicia Dawn Schultz Carson, who was brutally and viciously murdered January 12, 1996, at 134 Hadley Drive, Clarksville. Felicia was killed sometime in the morning between 7:30 a.m. and 12:30 p.m. There was no forced entry. She probably knew her murderer. Fee, as she was called, was not robbed or raped. Felicia was stabbed and cut over 80 times. She was struck in and about her face and head several more times with a blunt object. Fee fought the attacker or attackers for several minutes. Fee fell down on her knees at the closet entrance. Her bloody handprints frozen on the wall indicated that she rose up and entered the closet, being pursued by her killer or killers. She reached for her .25 caliber pistol but was pulled away, still being stabbed. She died in the closet according to the death certificate. Fee did not receive any one fatal wound, but merely bled to death on her carpet. At some point, Fee's clothes came off. She was naked when found. Her hands were bound behind her back. The murderer or murderers cut the phone cord in her bedroom and tied her up for some reason. She then was bound, out of energy, immobile, while her blood pumped out of her body. Her two small children, ages 7 and 11, found her when they came home from school. I live in Georgia and am frustrated at being 400 miles away. I do know 10 others have been murdered in a similar way. I invite anyone who may have any information about my sister's murder and or the other murders to please call the CPD. To the other families, I know your pain. I know. Please feel free to contact me to further my goal to raise awareness. Somebody knows. The cases again resurfaced in October of 1996 when a fourth woman was stabbed to death in her home. 23-year-old Krista Bramlett was found by her landlord in her Sunnydale mobile home park trailer. He came to check on her to follow up on an event earlier in the week where a trash can had been set on fire near her home. When he found her, she had been violently killed and her throat had been cut. When Captain Doug Pechtel was asked about a connection to the other cases, he said that he did not believe there was any connection whatsoever and that they found no similarities. In Krista's case, she had been sexually assaulted. Her body was found slumped in front of her TV, which eerily was still on. Neighbors had last seen her a couple of days prior, sitting on her front steps with the door open. She had only lived at the residence for a short time, and she lived alone. In November of 1996, 10 months after her murder, Felicia Carson's family took to the media again to plead for information in her case and raise awareness for the others. They also increased the reward to $10,000. This came aligned with her birthday. At that time, Felicia's siblings gave updates on her two children. They struggled deeply with their mother's death. Her son, who was 12 at this point, at first he said he'd never play baseball again because that was something special he did with his mom. But by summer, he had begun playing again, and he told his loved ones that he thought about his mother almost constantly while he played. Felicia's siblings said that she was excited for nursing school, but her long-term goal was actually to become a forensic scientist and to be a person who could help solve murder cases. She was fascinated by the developing technology of the 90s. Betty Harrison, Felicia's mother, told the papers, quote, I worry about what's prowling the streets of Clarksville. There are so many unsolved murders and so much violent crime. I worry that more young women are going to be murdered before this killer or these killers are caught. End quote. She had a point. 1996 ended as a crime-filled year for the city of Clarksville. There were 13 murders, 7 of which were solved, 6 which were still unsolved. And that prompted law enforcement to add 2 more members to their homicide task force. In January of 1997, a year after Felicia Carson was murdered, her brother once again wrote to the papers. He said in part, quote, "There is an unclaimed $10,000 reward waiting for anyone who has relevant information that will result in a conviction of the person or persons who committed this crime. The state has offered $4,500, and our family has put in an additional $5,500 to equal the $10,000. Felicia is one among many unsolved murders in Clarksville. The women of Clarksville are under attack by a sick, sadistic murderer who still roams your streets. Please, please help get this person or persons off the street. It does seem obvious that the state of Tennessee does not possess the resources to solve the cases of the murdered women of Clarksville, Tennessee. The recent task force was assembled long overdue, but was nonetheless a positive move. The FBI only needs to be asked for help. I pray that someone may make the call that can help us all. I also want to thank the many friends Felicia had for their support and kind words during this whole ordeal. Your prayers and thoughts helped our family in untold ways. Again, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I will accept any collect phone calls from a concerned citizen who may have one piece of information to help solve our case or the other unsolved cases covering the murdered women of Clarksville." The next break in any of the cases would come in June of 1997, when police announced that they were looking at a serial killer who had been recently apprehended. Dubbed the fast food killer, Paul Dennis Reed Jr. carried out a series of armed robberies and murders at fast food restaurants in the Nashville and Clarksville area earlier in 97. His reign of terror left 7 people dead and 1 survivor. On the morning of February 16, 1997, Paul Dennis Reed Jr. walked into a Captain D's restaurant on Lebanon Road in Nashville's Don Salon neighborhood under the guise of applying for a job. Once inside, he turned the encounter into a robbery, forcing a 16-year-old employee named Sarah Jackson and 25-year-old manager Steve Hampton into the restaurant's walk-in cooler. There, he ordered them to lie face down on the floor before shooting them both. After the murders, Reed stole money from the restaurant, including a significant amount of coins from the register. Just 2 days later, investigators would learn that he used some of the stolen cash as a down payment on a vehicle. Just over a month later, on the night of March 23, 1997, Reed struck again at a McDonald's on Lebanon Road in Nashville's Hermitage neighborhood. As 4 employees were leaving after closing, Reed confronted them at gunpoint and forced them back inside the restaurant. Once in a storage area, he shot and killed 17-year-old Andrea Brown, 27-year-old Ronald Santiago, and 23-year-old Robert Sewell. A 4th employee, Jose Antonio Ramirez Gonzalez, was also targeted, but when Reed attempted to shoot him, the gun malfunctioned. Gonzalez seized the opportunity to fight back, prompting Reed to stab him 17 times. Despite his injuries, Gonzalez survived by remaining motionless and convincing Reed that he was dead. After Reed left with approximately $3,000 stolen from the restaurant, Gonzalez managed to crawl to a nearby phone and call 911. Miraculously, he survived the attack and would later provide crucial testimony against Reed. A month later, on the evening of April 23, 1997, Reed traveled to Clarksville and targeted a Baskin-Robbins on Wilma Rudolph Boulevard after the store had closed for the night. Somehow convincing the employees to let him inside, Reed abducted 21-year-old Angela Holmes and 16-year-old Michelle Mace. He then forced the 2 young women into a vehicle and drove them to the secluded area of Dunbar Cave State Park. The following day, their bodies were discovered. Both had suffered fatal slash wounds to their throats. Reed's killing spree finally came to an end on June 1, 1997. That day, he showed up at the home of Mitch Roberts, a former supervisor who had fired him from a Shoney's restaurant months earlier. Armed with a gun, Reed confronted Roberts and attempted to force him into a vehicle. Roberts was able to break free and run back inside his home, causing Reed to flee before the kidnapping could be completed. The incident gave investigators the break they needed. Police arrested Reed shortly afterwards and connected him quickly to the string of fast food robberies and murders that had terrorized Middle Tennessee. Now, just to skip ahead for a moment, he would be tried in these cases and get several life sentences. But right now, here in 1997, police in Clarksville wondered if he could be connected to any of their unsolved murders. Clarksville District Attorney General John Carney confirmed this but was cagey on details, stating, quote, "It's important to establish a timeline for his whereabouts and his MO. All that's something the FBI is working on." But when asked if he was being looked at for some of these cases, he did say yes. Felicia Carson's name was specifically linked as a possibility. Her sister, Cynthia, told the Leaf Chronicle that she was shocked to hear that her sister's case could be connected, but thought back to how one family member had been told by an acquaintance of Felicia's shortly after her murder that they saw her at the Governor Square Mall a few weeks before her murder with a tall, dark-haired man, which does match the description of Paul Reed, but also a lot of other people. She said, quote, "If someone sees their two pictures together, perhaps somebody may recall seeing them together, if that ever happened." Cynthia also shared that she held the belief that there was a chance that these Clarksville stabbing cases were connected. In a 1998 article, a new detail was released in Felicia Carson's case. It was revealed that she had gone out socializing the night before to the Red Carpet Lounge in Clarksville, and her family thought that someone may have observed something. They may not know that it's significant, and so they wanted to put that detail out there in case anyone remembered seeing her with someone. Felicia's case and the others stayed cold, without many public updates for years. Then, in July of 2002, the Homicide Task Force took a trip to Philadelphia to have the Vidocq Society take a look at Felicia Carson's case specifically, and also the others. The Vidocq Society is a Philadelphia-based invitation-only nonprofit organization of forensic experts, criminologists, and former law enforcement professionals who volunteer their time to help police agencies solve difficult, unsolved murder cases. When they announced that they were doing this, they also casually mentioned something they hadn't said prior. Sheriff's Sergeant Brian Prentice stated at the time that the murders of Carolyn Vega Velasquez and Azuria Johnson were related. Not, I think they are related. They are related. That's how it was phrased. But they didn't elaborate any further, and there didn't appear to be any new breaks in those cases. But suddenly in 2006, there would be one, and it was nothing anybody saw coming. In October of 2006, a woman named Lejanra Polk walked into a Nashville police station and told investigators she wanted to talk about the murder of a Hispanic woman in Clarksville who had been tied up and left for dead on the floor of her home. Montgomery County investigators traveled to Nashville to speak with Polk. Although she refused to sign a Miranda waiver or allow officers to take notes during the interview, she voluntarily spoke with them and admitted that she and her cousin, Nicole Davis, had been at Carolyn's home on the night of the murder. Polk claimed she spent much of the evening smoking crack cocaine in the bathroom and said that when she emerged, she found Carolyn already bound on the floor. According to Polk, Carolyn asked for her help, but she instead fled to the car and waited for Davis to come outside. Over the next couple of years, investigators conducted additional interviews with Polk. Her story changed in some respects, but she consistently placed herself at the home that night. During one interview, she acknowledged that she, Davis, and Carolyn had spent the evening drinking, smoking marijuana, and using crack cocaine together. Meanwhile, investigators re-examined the physical evidence collected back in 1995. A fingerprint recovered from a glass vase inside the home was matched to Nicole Davis, confirming that she had been present. However, much of the remaining forensic evidence pointed only to Carolyn herself. The blood, hair, and other biological evidence recovered from the scene belonged to the victim, and investigators were unable to identify any additional fingerprints. The most damaging testimony came from Nicole Davis herself. At trial, Davis testified that she and Polk had driven from Nashville to Clarksville with the intention of robbing Carolyn. According to Davis, the three women spent several hours socializing, drinking champagne, and using drugs before the evening suddenly turned violent. Davis claimed that Polk unexpectedly attacked Carolyn, spraying her with pepper spray, choking her, and eventually stabbing her multiple times. Davis admitted that she helped bind Carolyn's hands and later assisted in taking property from the home before the pair fled back to Nashville. She testified that Polk disposed of evidence along the way and traded some of the stolen items for drugs. While Davis portrayed herself as a frightened accomplice rather than the primary attacker, she acknowledged that she never attempted to stop the assault and participated in the robbery. The pair targeted Carolyn because they figured she would have a lot of money as the widow of a soldier who died in combat. Davis also shared that she only knew Carolyn through genre Polk. Both women were charged with murder in Carolyn's case. Legendre Polk, who was 47 at this point, was convicted of 1 count of felony murder and 1 count of second-degree murder, and she received an automatic life sentence. Nicole Davis, on the other hand, reached a plea agreement with prosecutors and agreed to testify against Polk. She pleaded guilty to facilitation of first-degree murder and especially aggravated robbery. In exchange for her cooperation, Davis received a 25-year sentence. She testified that while she participated in the robbery and helped bind Carolyn's hands, she did not expect Polk to kill Carolyn and claimed she was afraid of Polk during the attack. The judge ultimately accepted her plea agreement, though her testimony made clear she was involved in the events leading up to the murder. After this, any connection to Azuria Johnson's murder dissolved, and authorities went back to stating that the cases were not connected. Unfortunately, when it comes to Azuria and Felicia's cases, they are still waiting for a break 30 years later. But before I wrap up, I don't want us to forget about Krista Bramlett. I know I didn't get too far into her case for this episode, but hers actually did get solved. For more than 2 decades, Krista's killer remained unknown. Then in 2019, Clarksville police received a breakthrough when a DNA profile from the case generated a match through CODIS. The match pointed investigators to Kenneth Hudspeth, a man who had been living in the same mobile home park as Krista at the time of her murder. Detectives learned that Hudspeth had moved away shortly after the homicide and had accumulated arrests and prison terms in other states over the years. After interviewing him in Arizona, investigators concluded that he had been the last known person to see Krista alive and charged him with her murder. After a 5-day trial in 2021, a Montgomery County jury found Kenneth Hudspeth guilty in the murder of Krista Bramlett. Jurors convicted him of first-degree felony murder, second-degree murder, and 2 counts of aggravated rape. More than 25 years after Krista's death, her family finally saw the case reach a courtroom. In January of 2022, a judge sentenced Hudspeth to life in prison for the murder, plus an additional 20 years for the rape convictions. The questions in the other cases remain. Are Felicia and Azuria's cases related? Was a serial killer like Reed responsible for one or both? Are there crimes from outside the area that match that MO? I think about the military community. If it was someone who was serving in the military at the time, did they move out of the area? Police have been quiet about if there's any forensic evidence that could be tested in these cases with modern advancements. Specifically, I think of Azuria's case and the butcher knife that was found right by the sink. And the scene at Felicia's home was so violent, it's hard to imagine there wasn't physical evidence left behind anywhere. I wonder, was anybody officially ruled out as suspects in either case? These are just a fraction of the questions that I have, and probably many others do too. And if you have any information you think is small, it could be the key to solving either of these cases, and these families deserve to have answers. If you have any information on the unsolved murders of Felicia Carson and Azuria Johnson in Clarksville, Tennessee in 1996, contact 931-645-TIPS or go to www.p3tips.com. Those are through Crime Stoppers. You can remain anonymous, and both cases have a $10,000 reward for information leading to an arrest. This has been another episode of A Simpler Time True Crime. If you appreciate the work I'm doing, please go over to Apple, to Spotify, wherever you're listening, and leave a 5-star review. Word of mouth helps me tremendously, so please share this podcast with a friend. Also, if you wish to support the podcast monetarily, I have a $5 Spreaker Supporters Club. You just scroll to the link at the bottom of the show notes below all my source material. And if you do that, you're able to get ad-free episodes. You just have to listen on Spreaker.com or through the Spreaker app. Case suggestions can be made to simplertimecrimepod@gmail.com. I also chat with people over on Instagram, so feel free to reach out to me there as well. As always, thank you guys so much for listening, and I'll see you again next Monday.